We're talking about topics related to our fifth and final lesson in the module, the hope of resurrection. And in this discussion video, we're going to be talking about something that Aquinas has to say, who's a pretty important philosopher, theologian that we've been relying on at some points along the way. Now, he asks a question in his magnum opus, the Summa Theologiae. He asks the question whether the body is necessary for man's happiness. And he defines happiness in two ways. We can talk about a sort of natural happiness, a perfection in this life, which does require the body, because we need the sensory data, what we take in from our senses for the world around us, and that's really living in tune with our nature and what we, I guess, some of what we looked at in the first lesson. But there's another way that Aquinas talks about happiness, a sort of ultimate happiness or perfect happiness, which is found in what he calls the beatific vision, our vision of God, which is an orientation towards and in complete unhindered enjoyment of God. And for that he says, no, we don't need the body, because for Aquinas, that is bound up in the intellect. We don't touch God, we don't smell God, we don't see God with our eyes, and for that reason we don't need our bodies to appreciate the glory of God. We just need our intellect. That's the gist of what Aquinas has to say, and we'll leave a link in the description below for that particular part of the Summa, if you'd like to go and read it for yourself. The question we've got is, well, what do we think of what Aquinas says?
Yeah, I think we should probably also, I mean, you did kind of say this, but we should maybe underscore it a bit, because the Bible also talks about visions. You know, Daniel had visions, or John had the vision and the revelation, and so on. We don't mean, when we talk about the vision of God in this context, we don't mean that. It's more like, we're using the word analogously, I guess. So it's sort of how you say, like, oh, I see how the conclusion follows from the premises. You don't, like, actually see something with your eyes. You, like, understand something with your intellect. And it's something like that. It's not quite that, because we're not just believing propositions in the vision of God, but it's a direct experience of God through our intellect, is what Aquinas has in mind. So what do we think about that?
I guess the question is, how does that square with what we've been saying so far about what it means to be made in God's image?
I would think what we've said, the stance that we've taken, that the image of God is these three components or aspects fitting together: the substantive aspect, the relational aspect, and the vocational aspect, would mean that if perfect happiness involves being like having a full experience of God as a human being, that we would need to have all of those aspects together in order to fully appreciate God, because the image of God, as we as humans understand it, is expressed through all of those things. Which would mean that we do need a body. Not only that, we need community. I guess you could even say we need creation to some extent, if you're going to think about the vocational aspect of it.
I mean, thinking about the vocational aspect, that was a sort of both and, where we need other people, but we also need, the world itself. It's a bit of a two-pronged sort of angle on it. What is interesting is that when we've been moving through these different views of what it means to be made in God's image, the one where Aquinas featured most prominently was the substantive view, where we saw that what it means to be made in the image of God is, in some sense, bound up with us being rational animals, that we're intellectual beings. And that's something that Aquinas was very keen on emphasizing. That kind of, for him, seemed to be where being made in God's image would begin and end, that we're intellectual beings.
Yeah, and I think that he doesn't make that connection explicit, as far as I'm aware, in the section that when he turns to talk about happiness, but it does seem to influence the way he approaches the question. So the fact that he sees the height of human existence, or what makes humans most distinctive is our rational faculty, our intellect, and will, then like it's not surprising that when it comes to talk about perfect happiness, you can have that in some sense without the body, and just that aspect that makes us unique as humans.
Yeah. What's on one level, it actually sounds quite Platonic, and that's not a surprise. Aquinas, to a large extent, was synthesizing what came before, and a lot of the early church, particularly Augustine, they were quite Platonic in that sense, and I suppose it's not just limited to Plato or Platonic thinking, but it seemed very endemic of that time that they would put preference on the intellectual and put preference on the immaterial.
Yeah, and we should say, we don't say this lightly. I think both of us are pretty keen on Aquinas, and so we want to be careful here. But I think it's worth considering a potential objection to the position that we're espousing. So what we're saying, maybe to make it clear, what we're saying is that in order for human beings to experience perfect happiness, they need not only this direct intellective vision of God, but we need our bodies, we need we need community, and we need something like a creation of which we, or humans or something, rule. And so an objection that you might raise to that position, which you couldn't raise to Aquinas' position because he says you can be happy without even a body, is that so the objector might say, well, are you saying then that God is not enough to make us perfectly happy? That you need all these other things to be added in order for you to have happiness? And I think that is a really important question because, going back to Aristotle, and I think we spoke about this in our first module on practical ethics, but happiness is defined really as like that which we desire for its own sake and never for the sake of something else. So it is this ultimate thing that we would never desire something more if we had perfect happiness.
Yeah, and now to say that for us to be truly happy, we need God, but we also need other people, does seem to, at least on the surface, seems to take away from how sufficient God is to bring us happiness. Like, is God not enough?
Yeah. So I guess the way I'd approach that is by saying that answer, and hopefully this would work. Maybe when we meet Aquinas one day, he can be like, your answer didn't really work out. But until then, this is what I'll answer. I guess I'd say that it's not that something's missing in God or something like that these other things are adding to God. Really, it is the beatific vision that is our happiness. It is God. But our appreciation of it or our ability to receive it is limited. So the limitation is on our side, not with God's amazingness or glory. And that limitation is overcome or fulfilled or whatever by expressing God through these other means as well as a direct access from the intellect. So, yeah, because we're limited, we need not only to have our intellect enlightened, I guess, but it's also or rather the lightening of our intellect would be a better way of saying it, requires that the image of God be projected around us like he has done, or similar to how he's done in the first creation. That's how I would say. Now we should add, by the way, before we get blamed for misrepresenting Aquinas, he doesn't say that the body isn't necessary at all. He says it's not necessary in the sense that it's not it's not necessary for man to experience perfect happiness. But it is necessary in a secondary sense, which is, how could you describe it? It's like you're missing something. It's like what we said in, if you're missing a body, you're missing like a huge part of you or nature as a human being, right?
Yeah.
And so your soul isn't able to operate fully.
Yeah, there's certain functions and certain capacities that we're not able to realize without a body, and even if complete enjoyment of God is not one of those, then certainly there are a bunch of others that we're missing, and there's a sort of frustrating existence about that, at least in my mind. So yeah, Aquinas does go on in the very next article to the one we're talking about to say, yes, we will have a body, but wants to stress that but that body will be perfect, because if it wasn't, then that'll just get in the way and make life miserable for us.
Yeah, so I guess in that sense, our disagreement isn't like gigantic with Aquinas, but it is still there, I think, in saying that we don't think it's just, or at least from what seems to follow from what we've been saying, although we could be wrong, I guess, but what seems to follow is that it's not just that you need the body in order to like have a full nature or something like that, but you actually need your body in order to fully experience the vision of God by virtue of your limitation as a human being.